The night Eleanor Sinclair walked into Ashworth House, she already knew something was wrong. She had known it since the carriage ride, when her hands would not stay still, when her breath kept catching in her throat for no reason she could name. She had known it in the way Lord Cavendish Fay had looked at her before she climbed the steps, not with warmth, not with affection, but with the particular look of a man checking that an object he owned was presentable enough to be seen in public. Eleanor was 23 years old. She was the only daughter of Charles Sinclair, the Earl of Sinclair, and she had been raised to be graceful, composed, and grateful for every advantage her birth had given her. She could speak French and Italian without an accent. She could play the pianoforte well enough to draw genuine admiration. She could hold a conversation with a bishop or a politician and leave both feeling they had spoken with someone worth knowing. She had been told all her life that these qualities made her valuable. She was beginning to understand that valuable was not the same as free. The ball at Ashworth House was the largest event of the season. 500 guests moved through rooms lit by thousands of candles, their reflections multiplied in every gilded mirror, their voices rising and falling in the particular music of a crowd that believes it is at the center of the world. The chandeliers overhead were magnificent, heavy with crystal, blazing with light, and the flowers at every table were fresh and white and perfect. It was the kind of evening that looked, from the outside, like happiness itself. Eleanor smiled. She had learned to smile at 21, when she first understood that smiling was armor. If you smiled at the right moment, people stopped looking at your eyes, and it was her eyes, she had always been told, that gave too much away. Lord Fay was beside her for the first 20 minutes. He introduced her to people she had already met, spoke on her behalf to people she was perfectly capable of addressing herself, and twice touched the small of her back in a way that was meant to look affectionate and felt, to her, like a hand placed on a lock. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, handsome in a practiced way, and possessed of the easy confidence of a man who had never once in his life been told no and believed it. They had been engaged for 4 months. The engagement had been arranged by her father, in a manner Eleanor had never quite been able to describe accurately to herself. It had not been forced. There had been no shouting, no ultimatum delivered at the dinner table. There had simply been a conversation in her father's study, a conversation in which it became clear, gently, reasonably, with a great deal of talk about security and the family's finances and the importance of a good match in uncertain times, that refusing Lord Fay would cause her father considerable difficulty. And Eleanor, who had loved her father since she was small enough to sit on his knee and listen to him read, had not been able to bring herself to cause him difficulty. So she had said yes. And Lord Fay had been pleased. And her father had been relieved. And Eleanor had gone to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and felt, with absolute clarity, that she had made a terrible mistake. And then she had gotten up, straightened her dress, and told herself it would be all right. It was not all right. She discovered this over the course of 4 months in pieces, each piece small enough on its own to be explained away, but together forming a picture she could no longer pretend not to see. The way he corrected her opinions in company, the way he directed her reading, the letter he had sent to her father's solicitor, which she had seen by accident, inquiring about the legal mechanisms by which a wife's property transferred to her husband upon marriage, and whether any existing restrictions could be dissolved. The way he had looked at her when she asked him, carefully, why he had written that letter. Not angry exactly. Not yet. Just very still. And in his eyes a small, cold light that she had not seen there before. She had not asked him again. That evening, standing in the ballroom of Ashworth House, with 500 people around her, and the music playing, and the chandeliers blazing, Eleanor smiled and nodded, and said the right things to the right people. And when Lord Fay finally moved away to speak with some political acquaintance, she breathed for the first time in 20 minutes. She found the terrace by instinct, the way a person finds an open window in a room that has grown too warm. The terrace ran along the south side of the house, looking out over a formal garden that was dark now except for the light that spilled from the windows. It was cold for September. She had left her wrap inside, and she knew she should go back for it. But she stood at the stone railing and let the cold air touch her face and did not move. She did not hear him approach. She only knew he was there when he spoke, and even then he spoke quietly, not startling her, the way a person speaks when they have been watching for a moment and have decided they should make themselves known rather than leave. Lady Eleanor. She turned. She knew who he was, without needing to search her memory. Everyone in England who moved in any kind of society, knew who Richard Ashworth was. He was the 8th Duke of Hartwell, and he was 34 years old, and he was the kind of man who occupied a room simply by standing in it, not because of his height, though he was tall, and not because of his looks, though he was not unpleasant to look at, with dark hair, touched at the temples with early gray, and a face that was serious without being cold. He occupied rooms because he was entirely, absolutely himself, in a way that most people never managed. He did not perform, he did not adjust, he simply was. Eleanor had met him twice before, once at a garden party 3 years ago, and once at a dinner she could no longer remember clearly. He had been polite on both occasions. He had been nothing more than polite. She had thought of him, when she had thought of him at all, as a man who had no particular need of anyone, and was satisfied with that. "Your Grace," she said. She had meant to sound composed. She was nearly certain she managed it. He looked at her for a moment, just looked, in a direct way that was not rude, but was not careful either, the way a person looks when they are actually trying to see something, rather than simply appearing to, and then he said, very quietly, "Are you all right?" She felt something shift in her chest, not dramatically, just a small, sudden movement, like something that had been held in place a long time releasing very slightly. "Of course," she said. "I only stepped out for some air." He did not say anything. He simply waited. She had not expected him to wait. Most people, when given a polite answer, moved on. It was the social contract. You offered the answer that allowed the conversation to continue normally, and the other person accepted it, and the whole machinery rolled forward without friction. That was how it worked. That was how Eleanor had survived 4 months of engagement and 3 seasons of society events, and 23 years of being someone's daughter, and someone's intended and never, not once, simply herself. But Richard Ashworth did not accept the polite answer. He simply stood there, in the cold, on his own terrace, and waited. And Eleanor, who had not cried in 4 months, who had not told a single person in 4 months what she was actually feeling, who had smiled and nodded and said it was all right until she had almost convinced herself, found that the silence he offered her was more dangerous than any question he could have asked. "I am perfectly well," she said again, and this time her voice was slightly too careful, and she knew it, and she saw in his eyes that he heard it too. He took 1 step closer, not close enough to be improper, close enough to lower his voice and still be heard. "Who harmed you?" he murmured. The words were so simple, so direct, no softening, no careful phrasing, no performance of concern. That was really just curiosity, dressed up in polite clothes. Just 4 words, spoken with the quiet certainty of a man who had already seen something and simply wanted confirmation. Eleanor opened her mouth to say, "Nothing has harmed me. I am perfectly well. Thank you for your concern, Your Grace." She formed the words in her mind. She could feel them ready to come. They did not come. What came instead was the truth, or the beginning of it, or at least the part of it that had been pressing against the inside of her chest for 4 months, without a single moment of release. "Lord Fay," she said, and then she stopped, because even those 2 words felt enormous, felt like a stone lifted from a wall that was not supposed to be disturbed. Richard Ashworth said nothing. His face did not change. He simply listened, and the quality of his listening was such that it seemed to pull the rest of the words out of her, almost without her permission. She told him about the letter to the solicitor. She told him about the way Lord Fay had looked at her when she asked about it. She told him about the evening 2 weeks ago, the evening when she had told Lord Fay calmly, and with great care, that she did not wish to sign any document transferring control of her inheritance before the wedding, that she would prefer to wait and discuss the matter with her own solicitor, and how he had listened to her say this, with his face very still, and then he had reached out and gripped her wrist, not hard enough to leave a mark, just hard enough to make her understand that she was not being given a choice, and said, very quietly, that she would do what was expected of her, or he would make things very difficult for her family. She did not tell it the way she had told it to herself in the dark at night, with all the fear attached to it. She told it simply, the way you tell a fact. She was surprised by how simple it sounded when she told it plainly. The Duke of Hartwell listened to all of it without interrupting, without looking away, without any of the small signs that people give when they are listening, but also composing their response. He listened the way you listen, when the thing being said is the only thing in the room. When she finished, there was a pause. Not an uncomfortable one, just a pause. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I should not have," she said immediately. "It was not." "You should have," he said. "And you were right to." Something in the way he said it closed the door on the conversation she had been about to have with herself, the one in which she convinced herself she had been foolish to speak. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden, his hands resting on the railing, his expression the expression of a man who is thinking very carefully and sees no reason to hide the fact that he is doing so. "Your Grace," she said, "please do not. I will not do anything that will cause difficulty for you," he said. "You have my word." She did not know him well enough to know what his word was worth. She had been in the garden for 12 minutes, and she had just told the most powerful man in 3 counties something she had not told her closest friend. By any reasonable measure, this was alarming. She found, strangely, that it did not feel alarming. It felt like breathing. "I should go back inside," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She moved past him toward the terrace doors. She was almost inside when she heard him speak again, quietly, not really directed at her, almost as though he were simply thinking aloud. "No one will harm you again," he said. She did not turn back. She walked through the door and into the light and the noise, and found her smile again, within 3 steps. But her hands, she noticed, had stopped trembling. Inside the ballroom, Lord Fay was exactly where she had left him, laughing at something a man in a blue coat was saying, a glass of wine in his hand, entirely at ease. He did not notice when she returned. She stood nearby for a moment, watching him laugh, and thought about what she had just done. She thought she should be frightened. She thought she should be calculating what might happen next, what the Duke might do or say or tell someone, whether she had made things better or infinitely worse. She was not frightened. She was, for the first time in 4 months, something close to calm. On the terrace, the Duke of Hartwell stood alone for another 2 minutes. He looked at the garden. He thought about what he had just been told. He was a man who had spent the better part of his adult life dealing with complicated situations, and he had found, over the years, that complicated situations always simplified considerably when you stopped asking what would be convenient and started asking what was right. The answer to what was right was, in this case, quite clear. He turned and went back inside. Lord Fay was the first person he looked for. He found him near the card room, laughing too loudly at something, his glass held loosely, his posture the posture of a man who believed himself entirely secure. The Duke looked at him for a moment, carefully, without hurry, the way you look at something you are studying, not something you are angry at. He did not approach him. It was far too early to approach him. He found, instead, his solicitor, a gray and precise man named Arthur Wren, who had been at his side in professional capacity for 11 years and who was attending the ball tonight because the Duke had invited him with no explanation given. Arthur Wren was accustomed to being summoned without explanation. He appeared at the Duke's elbow within 3 minutes of being located. "I need information," the Duke said quietly. "Tonight, if possible." "What kind of information?" said Arthur Wren. "Financial and personal. The subject is Lord Cavendish Fay." Arthur Wren's expression did not change. He had worked for the Duke long enough to know that when the Duke made a request quietly and with great precision, it was not a request to be discussed, but a request to be fulfilled. "By morning?" said Arthur Wren. "By morning," said the Duke. Arthur Wren gave a small nod and dissolved back into the crowd, and the Duke turned and went to find the card room, where he had every intention of losing just enough to the right person to open a very useful conversation. Eleanor, across the room, did not see any of this. She was talking to a woman she liked, laughing at something genuine for the first time all evening, and she was not thinking about Lord Fay or the Duke or what the morning would bring. She was just breathing, and she had forgotten, until that moment, how good it felt simply to breathe. The orchestra played on, the candles burned. 500 people moved through the brilliant rooms of Ashworth House, and most of them did not know that the evening had already changed something, that in the space of 12 minutes on a cold September terrace, a chain of events had begun that would not be reversed. Lord Fay laughed again at something. The sound carried across the room. The Duke of Hartwell, settling into a chair at the card table, heard it. He picked up his cards. He did not look up, but the stillness that had settled over his face was the particular stillness of a man who has decided something and sees no reason to hurry, because he is absolutely certain of where things are going. Eleanor reached for a glass of lemonade from a passing tray, tasted it, and found it sweet. She let herself enjoy it. She looked across the room at nothing in particular, and she did not know yet what had been set in motion on her behalf, and she did not need to know tonight. Tonight she had done the one thing she had not believed herself capable of doing for 4 months. She had told the truth, and the truth had been received by someone who had not flinched. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. The ball continued. The music rose. The night pressed against the windows of Ashworth House, cold and still, and full of the kind of quiet that gathers before something changes. By morning, everything would be different. Not yet. Not quite yet. But the door had opened, and the night was moving forward, and somewhere across the room, Lord Cavendish Fay laughed one more time at something that was not funny, and Eleanor Sinclair heard him laugh and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she was not alone. Arthur Wren did not sleep that night. This was not unusual for him. He was 51 years old, with iron-gray hair, and the careful, methodical mind of a man who had built his entire professional life on the principle that information was more powerful than anything else in the world, more powerful than money, more powerful than social position, more powerful than anger, or charm, or any of the other tools that lesser men relied on. Information was quiet. Information was permanent. And when you had enough of it, the right kind, gathered carefully and presented cleanly, there was almost nothing in the world it could not alter. He had left Ashworth House at 10:30, slipping out a side door with a list of names in his coat pocket, and a very clear picture in his mind of what the Duke needed and why. He had been the Duke's solicitor long enough to understand that when the Duke said he needed information about a man, and needed it quickly, the situation was serious, and the information would be used. He had also been in the legal profession long enough to know that men like Lord Cavendish Fay were rarely as secure as they appeared, that the kind of confidence Fay wore in public was usually the confidence of a man who had spent years making sure that certain things stayed hidden, rather than the confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. The difference was subtle to most people. It was not subtle to Arthur Wren. By 11 o'clock, he was at his own desk, with 2 trusted clerks summoned from their homes by urgent notes, and a messenger already dispatched to a contact he kept for exactly these situations. A quiet man named George Sallow, who worked in the financial district, and knew where to find the kind of records that were technically accessible to anyone, but practically accessible only to someone who knew which door to knock on and how. By midnight, the first documents had arrived. Wren read them at his desk by good lamplight, his tea going cold beside him, his expression the expression of a man reading a map of territory he had suspected, but not yet confirmed. He made notes in his small, precise handwriting. He underlined figures. He turned pages carefully. By 1 in the morning, the second set of records arrived, and then the third, and then something that George Sallow had sent with a short note attached, that said only, "You will want to see this." Wren looked at what Sallow had sent. He sat back in his chair. He picked up his pen and wrote a brief message to the Duke, to be delivered at first light. "The materials are assembled. I will attend you at 7. Then he went back to work. The Duke, meanwhile, had stayed at the ball until midnight, which was later than he normally stayed at anything. He had spent the time usefully. The card game had given him what he needed from Lord Fay's cousin, a soft-faced man named Gerald who drank too much and became confidential after his 3rd loss. Gerald had not meant to say anything interesting. He had said it anyway, in the loose and wandering way of people who are slightly unsteady and feel, in the warmth of a social occasion, that the rules about what should not be spoken aloud do not quite apply. He had mentioned, in passing, that Cavendish owed quite a lot to quite a few people. The Duke had not pressed. Pressing would have made Gerald cautious. Instead, he had simply listened, and nodded, and lost another hand deliberately, and Gerald had continued talking, and by the time the conversation ended, the Duke had 3 names he had not had before, and a rough sense of the scale of what Fay was carrying. It was larger than he had expected. He had not shown surprise. Surprise was a luxury he had learned, a long time ago, to keep private. After midnight, he had moved through the remaining conversations of the evening, with his usual composed manner, said his goodbyes to the right people, and climbed into his carriage. He did not look at the house as it pulled away. He looked ahead, at nothing, which was what he did when he was thinking. He thought for the entire drive home. He thought about Eleanor Sinclair standing on the terrace in the cold, her hands perfectly still. Because she had been holding them still deliberately, he had noticed that. And the way she had told him what Faye had done. He thought about the fact that she had not cried, had not made it dramatic, had simply stated it the way you state a thing you have had to live with long enough that you no longer have the luxury of reacting to it. He thought about the grip on the wrist. He thought about the letter to the solicitor. He had known men like Lord Faye before. Not this particular man, not these particular details, but the type. The type that collected things, property, status, people, and treated everything it collected with the same fundamental indifference, the indifference of ownership. Things that were owned did not need to be considered. They only needed to comply. He had always found such men tedious. He had never before found one in the proximity of someone who was clearly not a thing. He arrived home at 12:30. He changed out of his evening clothes. He sat at his desk and read until 3, not because the reading was particularly urgent, but because sleep was not going to come, and there was no use pretending otherwise. At 7 in the morning, Arthur Wren arrived. He came with a leather case and the look of a man who has worked through the night and does not consider this remarkable. The Duke received him in the study, where coffee had been set and a fire built, and Wren opened the case on the table and began to talk. He talked for 40 minutes. The Duke listened without interrupting, which was his habit. He let information arrive in the order it was given, rather than reaching for the pieces he was most interested in. Reaching disrupted the shape of things. He had found, over the years, that the shape of things mattered as much as the individual pieces. The shape, in this case, was not good for Lord Cavendish Faye. The debts were the beginning. £43,000 spread across 7 creditors, some of them patient, some of them not, all of them carrying the particular silence of men who knew that pressing too hard too soon would destroy the collateral they were relying on. Faye had been managing them for 3 years by a combination of partial payments, charm, and the promise of what his marriage to Eleanor Sinclair's inheritance would produce. The marriage, it was now apparent, was not intended to be the beginning of a prosperous life. It was intended to be the solution to a crisis that had been building for years. But the debts were only the beginning. What George Sallow had found, and this was what Wren meant when he said you will want to see this, was a set of records from a church registry in Cheapside. A marriage registered in 1809. The wife's name was Eliza Marsh. The marriage had never been dissolved. There was a child registered 2 years later, a son. Cavendish Faye was already married. The Duke sat with this for a moment. He intended to marry Lady Eleanor while already having a wife, he said. So it appears, said Wren. That is not merely a financial matter. No, said Wren. It is a criminal one. The Duke looked at the documents. He looked at them the way he looked at things when he was deciding not whether to act, but how. The decision to act had been made the previous evening on a cold terrace. The only question now was method. Who else knows this, he said. George Sallow, myself, you, and Faye's creditors. Do they know about the marriage in Cheapside? Almost certainly not. They believe him to be unmarried. His availability for a wealthy match is part of what makes him a viable risk to them. The Duke nodded slowly. There was a second matter, which Wren raised after a pause. The matter of a previous heiress. Her name was Catherine Hollis. She was the daughter of a merchant family, with substantial assets and no title, and 4 years ago, she had very briefly been engaged to Lord Faye, and had then, quite suddenly, withdrawn from the engagement, without public explanation, and married someone else within 3 months. She was now living in the country with her husband and 2 children, and had not spoken publicly about Lord Faye since. I would need to speak with her, said Wren. Can you locate her? By this afternoon. Then do so, said the Duke, gently. Do not press. Simply make it known that if she has something to say, there is now someone who will listen. Wren made a note. The Duke stood and went to the window. It was 8 in the morning. The street outside was quiet, the pale light of early autumn doing very little to warm it. He stood there for a moment and thought about Eleanor Sinclair waking up in her father's house, perhaps right now, perhaps looking out at a morning she had no reason to believe was going to be different from any other morning. He thought about the £43,000, and the marriage in Cheapside, and the girl in the country who had run from this man 3 months after meeting him. He thought about the wrist. "There is also the matter of the newspapers," he said. Wren looked up. "Both of them," said the Duke. "I will write the letters this morning. I want them in the editor's hands before noon." "That is a significant step," said Wren, carefully. "Yes," said the Duke, "it is." He turned from the window. His face was composed, as it always was, but there was something behind the composure that Wren had seen perhaps twice in 11 years. A quality of absolute resolve, the look of a man who has examined every option and arrived at a conclusion so clear to him it barely requires thought anymore. "I want a complete document prepared," said the Duke. "Everything, the debts, the names of the creditors, the marriage registration, the timeline. I want it organized clearly, without flourish, in the kind of language that cannot be misunderstood. I want it to be exactly what it is, a record of facts." "For the newspapers?" "For the newspapers, and for the Earl of Sinclair." Wren wrote this down. "Should I prepare a letter to accompany the document for Lord Sinclair?" "No," said the Duke. "I will go myself." Wren looked up briefly, then down again. He wrote another note. "One more thing," said the Duke. "The document for the Bow Street magistrate. That is separate. I will need that by this afternoon. I can have it ready by noon." "Good." There was a pause. The fire crackled. Outside, a carriage passed on the street and was gone. "He will resist," said Wren. "Fay. When he understands what has happened, he will resist." "Yes," said the Duke. "He may try to discredit Lady Eleanor, or you. He may try," said the Duke. "But he will be trying with £43,000 of debt, and a marriage he has hidden for 5 years. His position will not survive contact with the truth." Wren said nothing. "People like Lord Fay," said the Duke, sitting back down, "are powerful in proportion to their secrets. Remove the secrets, and you remove the power. It is quite simple." Wren gathered the documents into a careful stack and began organizing them in the order in which they would be needed. He did not comment on what the Duke had said. He had worked for the man long enough to know that when he described something as quite simple, he meant it, not dismissively, not arrogantly, but the way a carpenter means it when he says a joint is well made. "I will return at noon with the full document," said Wren. "Thank you, Arthur," said the Duke. Wren packed his case and left. The Duke sat alone in the study with his coffee, which was now cold, and the fire, which was burning well. He sat still for a moment, just a moment, and allowed himself to think about what he was doing and whether it was right. He had done this since he was young, this deliberate pausing before action. His father had taught it to him without intending to, not as a lesson but simply by being the kind of man who moved fast, and thought afterward, and suffered the consequences. He had watched his father make that error enough times to learn from it. You paused. You asked whether what you were about to do was right. You answered honestly. And then, if the answer was yes, you did not pause again. The answer, this morning, was yes. He reached for the pen on his desk and pulled a sheet of paper toward him and began to write the first of 2 letters, one to the editor of the Morning Chronicle and one to the editor of the Times. He wrote carefully, clearly, without anger. He stated facts. He provided the evidence that would accompany each letter. He explained what the public record showed and what the legal implications were, and what he believed any responsible publication would consider its duty to report. He did not write his name in the body of the letters. He signed them at the bottom, clearly, with his full name and title, because he was not a man who did things from behind curtains. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it openly, and anyone who wanted to know who had done it would have no difficulty finding out. He blotted both letters. He sealed them. He rang for a footman and gave specific instructions about delivery. Then he went to change, because he had a call to make, and he intended to make it before the morning was much older. The Earl of Sinclair would be at breakfast. The Duke of Hartwell was going to join him. The Earl of Sinclair was a man of 60, who had once been vigorous and was now careful. He had a long face, deep-set eyes, and the look of a man who had been managing something for a very long time: his household, his reputation, his finances, his daughter. and was tired of it, in the particular way of a man who will never admit to being tired. He sat at his breakfast table at 9 in the morning, reading a newspaper he was not quite taking in, and when his butler appeared in the doorway and announced that the Duke of Hartwell was downstairs and asking to pay his respects, the Earl set down his paper and looked at the door for a long moment before saying, "Yes, of course. Show him in." He had not expected this. He could not think of a reason for this visit. He and the Duke were acquainted. Everyone in their circle was acquainted, but they were not close, had never been close, and there was no social occasion pending that would explain a morning call. He was still working through possibilities when the Duke walked in. He was dressed simply, dark coat, no particular ornamentation, the kind of clothing that said, "I am not here to perform." He had the same composed quality he always carried, but there was something behind it this morning that the Earl noticed without being able to name it. Not urgency exactly, something steadier than urgency, the quality of a man arriving at a conclusion rather than rushing toward one. "Lord Sinclair," said the Duke, "I am sorry to intrude so early." "Not at all," said the Earl, because there was nothing else to say. "Will you sit? May I offer you something?" "Thank you, no," said the Duke. He sat. He placed the leather case he had carried in on the table beside him. "I have something to share with you, and I wanted to share it in person." The Earl looked at the case. Something tightened in his chest, though he could not have said exactly why. "What is this about?" he said. "It is about your daughter," said the Duke. "And about Lord Fay." The Earl sat very still. He was a man who had spent his whole life being careful, and the careful man's reflex, when something comes at you unexpectedly, is to go very still and wait to see what shape it takes before you decide how to respond. The Duke opened the case and took out the document. He set it on the table between them. He did not push it forward, did not make it theatrical. He simply set it there and let the Earl reach for it when he was ready. The Earl reached for it. He read it in silence. The Duke sat across from him and did not speak. He did not watch the Earl's face, which would have been unkind. He looked at the table, at his own hands, at the window. It took 12 minutes for the Earl to read through it all. When he put it down, his face was the color of old paper. "Where did you get this?" he said. His voice was very controlled. "My solicitor assembled it last night. The documents are originals or certified copies. Each source is noted." "This marriage," said the Earl. He touched the page. "You are saying, 'There is a marriage certificate registered at St. Giles in Cheapside, dated March of 1809. The wife is named Eliza Marsh. There is a child registered in 1811. The marriage has not been dissolved. I have had this verified by 2 separate sources." The Earl was very quiet. "If Eleanor had married him," said the Duke quietly, "the marriage would have been illegal from the moment it was performed. She would have had no legal standing as his wife. Her property, upon transfer, would have passed to him regardless, and she would have had no recourse." The Earl put his hand flat on the table. He breathed. "I did not know this," he said. "I did not imagine you did," said the Duke. He said it without any trace of accusation, which was the only reason the Earl did not become defensive. It was simply a statement. "How did you—" The Earl paused, began again. "What prompted you to investigate?" "I spoke with Lady Eleanor last night," said the Duke. "At the ball." The Earl looked at him directly for the first time since he had sat down. "She told me something had happened," the Duke said. "She did not tell me the full extent of it. She told me enough." There was a long silence. A log shifted in the fireplace. Outside, somewhere on the street, a horse went by at a quick clip. "She did not tell me," said the Earl. His voice was very quiet. "No," said the Duke. "She did not." Another silence. The Earl did not explain this, and the Duke did not ask him to. He understood, because he was not a foolish man, that Eleanor had not told her father, because she was trying to protect him from difficulty, protect him from the weight of knowing something that required action. She had told a near stranger on a dark terrace, because a near stranger asked a direct question, and her father, for all his care and love, was the source of some of what she was trying to manage, rather than simply the person who could solve it. "There are also the debts," said the Duke. £43,000. The specific creditors are listed. He intended your daughter's inheritance to resolve them. The Earl looked at the page again. His eyes moved, but he was not really reading anymore. He was absorbing. "What do you intend to do?" he said. "It is already in motion," said the Duke. "The newspapers have been notified. The Bow Street magistrate will receive a document this afternoon regarding the undisclosed prior marriage. The engagement will need to be dissolved formally. I can provide you with the name of a solicitor who can handle that quickly and cleanly, if you would like one." The Earl was looking at him now, with an expression the Duke found difficult to read. It was not gratitude, exactly. It was not yet gratitude. It was the expression of a man standing at the edge of a very large realization, and not quite sure whether to step forward or back. "You did this," said the Earl slowly, "for Eleanor." "Yes," said the Duke. "You barely know her." "That is correct," said the Duke. He said it simply, without embarrassment, because there was nothing embarrassing about it. You did not have to know someone well to know that what was being done to them was wrong. That was not a complicated calculation. "I do not know how to," the Earl began. "There is nothing needed," said the Duke. "I wanted you to have the information before you saw it in the newspapers. That was the only reason I came this morning." He stood. He was done. There was nothing more that needed to be said here, and the Earl needed to be left with the documents and the fire and his own thoughts, because what he was absorbing was not a small thing, and a man deserved space to absorb it. He reached across and picked up his case. "The originals are there for you to keep," he said. "Everything is yours." The Earl rose automatically, the courtesy of a lifetime. "Your Grace," he said. "Lord Sinclair," said the Duke. He walked to the door, and then paused with his hand on the frame, and turned back. Not because there was something else to say, but because something made him. "She is very capable," he said. "Your daughter. Whatever she decides to do with her life from here, she will do it well." Then he left. The Earl stood at the table for a long time after the front door closed. He looked at the documents spread across his breakfast things. He looked at the letter from the solicitor regarding the Cheapside registry. He looked at the list of debts. He sat down. He thought about his daughter, who had not told him. He thought about why she had not told him. He thought about the morning he had sat with her in his study, and talked about security, and good matches, and uncertain times. He thought about the look on her face that morning, the look he had seen and chosen to call acceptance rather than grief. He put his head in his hands. He did not stay there long. He was not the kind of man who stayed in any difficult feeling for very long. He sat up and straightened himself, and reached for the bell. He had letters to write. He had a solicitor to summon. He had a great deal to do before the newspapers arrived. And when Eleanor came down for breakfast, he was going to look at her differently than he had ever looked at her before. He did not yet know what he was going to say, but he was going to look at her honestly, for the first time in a long time, and that was a beginning. In the offices of the Morning Chronicle, the Duke's letter had arrived 20 minutes ago. The editor was reading it at his desk, with the careful attention of a man who had been in the newspaper business long enough to know the difference between something dangerous and something important, and had learned, over the years, that the important things required the most care. He read it twice. He looked at the documents attached to it. He thought for several minutes. Then he called for his senior writer, and said there would be a change to the front page. The Times had received its packet at approximately the same time. The same process was beginning there. London was waking up, the streets were filling, carriages were moving and markets were opening, and people were going about the business of the morning, with no idea that by the time they sat down to breakfast tomorrow, the shape of one man's life would be entirely, permanently changed. Lord Cavendish Fay, at that hour, was still asleep. He slept heavily, without dreaming, in the large and well-furnished bedroom of his house in Mayfair. He had come home from the ball in good spirits. The evening had gone well. Eleanor had been appropriately presented. Several useful people had seen them together. The season was going as planned. He did not know yet. He was still the man he had been when he lay down. He was still secure, still certain, still the holder of all those carefully arranged secrets. In a few hours, he would not be any of those things. But for now he slept, and the morning moved on without him, and London prepared to read its papers. Eleanor read it with her morning tea. She had not expected it. She had woken at her usual hour, dressed with the help of her maid, and come down to the morning room, where her breakfast had been laid out with the ordinary precision of any other morning. Her father had not yet appeared, which was unusual. He was normally an early riser, but the papers were on the table as always, folded neatly beside the bread and the pot of tea. She poured her tea. She opened the Morning Chronicle. She read the front page. She had to read it twice. Then she set it down and sat for a moment, with her hands flat on the table, and simply existed in the extraordinary stillness of a person who has just learned that the world has rearranged itself while they were asleep. The article was careful, precise, and devastating. It laid out the financial record without drama. It reported the marriage registration in Cheapside with documentation attached. It named Lord Cavendish Fay clearly and completely, without the kind of careful hedging that newspapers used when they were not sure of their ground, which told Eleanor that whoever had provided the information had also provided ironclad evidence. There was a short paragraph about the pattern of behavior. Catherine Hollis was mentioned, not by name, but as a previous intended who had withdrawn from an engagement under circumstances that were now, in light of new information, worth noting. It was not written with fury. It was written with the coldness of total accuracy. Eleanor sat with the newspaper in her hands and thought about the previous evening, about the terrace, about 4 words spoken in the dark by a man she barely knew. She had told herself, walking back into the ballroom last night, that she did not know what the Duke would do. She had told herself it might be nothing. She had told herself, in the way you tell yourself things that you need to believe temporarily in order to function, that probably he would make some discreet inquiry, and perhaps have a word with someone, and that it was better than nothing, but it was not going to change anything fundamental. She had been wrong. Something moved through her. She was not sure what to call it. It was not quite disbelief, because the words were right there in front of her, and she was not a person who disbelieved things that were in front of her. It was not quite gratitude, because gratitude felt too small. It was not quite relief, though there was relief in it. It was something closer to the feeling of putting down a weight you have carried so long you had stopped noticing it was there. She sat with it for a moment. Then she stood and went upstairs to her writing desk. She sat down. She pulled out a sheet of paper. She picked up her pen. She wrote 3 sentences. She read them back. She did not change anything, because the sentences said exactly what she meant, and changing them would only have been the old habit of softening and adjusting and making herself easier to receive. She folded the letter. She sealed it. She rang for the footman and asked for it to be delivered to the Duke of Hartwell immediately. He arrived within the hour. She received him in the morning room, because her father was still in his study with his own solicitor, and because the morning room was the one room in the house that felt most like hers. Its windows looked onto the garden. Its furniture was arranged the way she had arranged it. Its bookshelves held the books she had actually read. It was a room she was comfortable in, and for the first time in months she wanted to be in a room she was comfortable in when she spoke to someone. The Duke came in. He was dressed as he had been that morning, simply, without the kind of elaborate care that announced itself. He stood just inside the door for a moment and looked at her, the same direct way he had looked at her on the terrace, and she thought, this is what it is like to be seen by someone who is not trying to see something useful. He was just looking, the way you look at a person. Good morning, she said. Good morning, he said. He sat in the chair she indicated. She sat across from him. She did not pour tea. Neither of them reached for anything. I read the papers, she said. Yes, he said. You did not tell me you were going to do that. No, he said. I did not want you to feel that you had to make any decisions about it. It was not your decision to make. She thought about this. It was an unusual thing to say. Most people did things on behalf of other people and then presented those things as gifts to be received gratefully, as things that required something in return, some acknowledgement of debt. The Duke had said, quite simply, it was not your decision, not your burden, not your thing to carry. It is the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever done for me, she said. She said it plainly, without drama, the way she had told him the truth on the terrace, without decoration. He looked slightly uncomfortable for the first time, not deeply uncomfortable. A small shift, a slight adjustment. She found it unexpectedly humanizing. The documents were clear, he said. Once you have clear documents, the rest follows simply. You gathered those documents in one night. Arthur Wren gathered them. He is very good at his work. She looked at him. You are deflecting. He paused. A small, genuine pause. And then something happened in his face. Not quite a smile, not reaching that far, but something in that direction. Something warm, in the gray eyes. "Perhaps I am," he said. She found that she did not want to look away. She looked away anyway, because looking away was the thing that gave you time to think, and she needed to think. "My father received you this morning," she said. "He did. How was he?" There was a slight pause. "He received the information with appropriate seriousness," said the Duke, which Eleanor recognized immediately as a very careful and considerate way of saying that her father had been shaken. "I should have told him," she said. "You were protecting him," said the Duke. "It is understandable." She looked back at him. "Is it?" "Yes," he said, "though he wishes you had told him. I think he wishes it rather a great deal." She thought about her father, about the way he had looked at her these past 4 months, looking and not quite seeing, the way you look at something you are a little afraid to examine too closely. She had loved him for it, a little, loved him for not looking too hard, because it meant she did not have to perform being fine in quite such detail. She was also very tired of being fine. "I am going to speak with him this afternoon," she said. "Good," said the Duke. A silence settled. It was not an uncomfortable one. She had noticed this about him already, that the silences with him were not silences that needed to be filled. Most people she knew were made uncomfortable by quiet. They moved to fill it with words, any words, and sometimes the words made things worse, or made things smaller than they were. This man simply sat in the quiet and let it be. "What happens now?" she said. "With Faye?" "The Bow Street magistrate will receive a document this afternoon regarding the marriage registration. The criminal matter will proceed in the appropriate way. The engagement has, practically speaking, already ended. I expect you will receive a formal dissolution by letter before evening. His club has already sent him notice that his membership is under review." Eleanor absorbed this. She thought about Lord Cavendish Faye, who had gripped her wrist in a quiet room and told her she would do what was expected. She thought about him reading his morning paper. She felt no satisfaction in imagining his face. She was surprised by that. She had expected to feel something more like triumph. Instead, she felt something quieter, the quiet of a thing being set down and not picked back up again. "Will he try to cause trouble?" she said. "He will try," said the Duke. "He will not succeed. The documents are too clear. And Catherine Hollis. Arthur Wren has reached her. She has indicated she is willing to speak with the magistrate. She is not required to, but she has indicated she is willing." Eleanor nodded. She thought about this woman she had never met, this woman who had run from Lord Faye 3 months after encountering him, and married someone else quickly, the way you move away from something dangerous. She thought about what that woman had carried for 4 years, and how this morning, she had woken up and perhaps read the same papers Eleanor had read. She hoped she had felt what Eleanor was feeling. That quiet, that putting down. "Your Grace," she said. He looked at her. She found that what she wanted to say was not quite sayable yet. It was too large, and she had always had difficulty with large things. Not because she was afraid of them, but because she wanted to say them right, and saying them right required more than she had available at this particular moment. "Thank you," she said instead. Simply, just, "Thank you." He held her gaze for a moment. Not long, just long enough to receive what she had said without deflecting it. "You are welcome," he said, simply, just that. Outside, a carriage went by. In the study down the hall, she could hear her father's voice, the low, careful voice of a man conducting difficult business. The morning was moving on. The day was beginning to be what it was. Eleanor felt, for the first time in 4 months, that she was in her own life again. Not performing it. Not managing it. In it. "I imagine," said the Duke, rising, "that you have a great deal to attend to today." "I do," she said, rising also. He moved toward the door. She walked with him to the hallway. He collected his hat and gloves from the table. He turned before he left and looked at her one more time. "If there is anything further that requires attention," he said, "Arthur Wren is at your disposal. He has been instructed." She nodded. He put on his hat. He went to the door. He opened it. "Will I see you at—" she began, and then stopped, surprised at herself for having begun. He turned back. He looked at her. She was not entirely sure what she had been going to say. At the Harrington dinner? At the Pemberton concert? It did not matter which occasion she had been reaching for. What mattered, and she knew this as clearly as she knew her own name, was that she had been reaching for an occasion. At whatever is next on the calendar, she finished. Which was not exactly what she had meant to say, but was not untrue. He held her gaze for a moment that was slightly longer than any of the other moments so far. "I expect so," he said. And then he was gone. Eleanor stood in the hallway after the door had closed. She stood there for a full minute, not moving, not doing anything in particular. She was aware of the house around her, her father's voice still audible from the study, the ordinary sounds of a household going about its morning. She was aware, too, of something that had not been present in this house for quite some time. Something like hope. She did not name it yet. It was too new to name. She simply let it be there, in her chest, small and warm and very much present. Then she squared her shoulders and went to find her father. She had things to say to him. Real things. True things. Things she should have said 4 months ago, and had not, and was going to say now. She knocked on the study door. "Come in," said her father. She came in. She sat down across from him, and she looked at him directly, and she said, "I need to tell you something. I should have told you much earlier, and I am sorry I did not." The solicitor quietly excused himself. The Earl of Sinclair looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in 4 months, and said, "I am listening." And Eleanor, who had been managing things alone for so long she had nearly forgotten what it felt like not to, began to speak. By the time Eleanor finished speaking, the fire in her father's study had burned down to steady red coals. She had been talking for 40 minutes. She had not rushed, had not been dramatic, had not cried, though there were moments where crying would have been easier. She had simply told him everything. The letter to the solicitor, the evening Lord Fay had gripped her wrist, the 4 months of carefully managed fear, the way she had smiled at everyone and told no one. Her father listened the way a man listens when he knows he has failed at something. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He looked at his hands while she spoke, and when she finished, he looked up, and his face had the look of a man who has been very wrong about something and knows it. "Eleanor," he said, and then he stopped, because he was not a man who was good at saying what needed to be said next, and he knew it, and the knowledge was in his face. "I know," she said gently. "I know it is hard. I should have seen it," he said. "You were not meant to see it," she said. He was very careful. "You are too generous to me." "Perhaps," she said, "but I am also telling you the truth. He was practiced at this. You were not looking for it." Her father was quiet for a moment. "You should not have had to carry it alone." "No," she agreed. "I should not have, but I am done carrying it." He reached across and took her hand. It was a gesture so simple, and so completely without performance, that she felt something release in her chest. The last of it, or most of it. Her hand in her father's hand, which had been large and warm and safe when she was a child, and was still, somehow, the same. "What do you want to do?" he said. "Going forward. What do you actually want?" She thought about this. It was remarkable, the feeling of being asked, of having the question addressed to her, and not to the idea of what was practical, or what was expected, or what would cause the least disruption. "What do you want?" "I want to live in my own life," she said. "I want to make decisions that are mine. I want to stop managing how I appear, and simply be what I am." Her father nodded. He held her hand. He looked at her. "You can do that," he said. "Whatever adjustments need to be made, in terms of your arrangements, your independence, we will make them. You have my word." It was, for her father, quite a speech. She squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Papa." He squeezed back. His eyes were bright. She chose to look at the fire, rather than make things uncomfortable for him by noticing. Across London, the afternoon was proceeding at its usual pace, except that it was not, quite, usual at all. By 2 o'clock, the document had reached the Bow Street Magistrate's office, delivered by Arthur Wren in person, who had the manner of a man who does not need to be persuasive, because the documents do all the persuasion required. The magistrate, a careful man with 20 years of experience and a very strong dislike of men who constructed fraudulent marriages in order to acquire other people's property, read through everything thoroughly, asked 3 precise questions, and indicated that the matter would be investigated immediately. Wren returned this information to the Duke, who received it with a nod. At 2:30, Lord Cavendish Fay was at his club, or rather, Lord Cavendish Fay had arrived at his club at 2, and had been received by the secretary with an expression that was not quite hostile, but was the particular kind of neutral that trained staff produce when they have been instructed to be neutral and are finding it difficult. He had been given a letter in a plain envelope. He had opened the letter. He had read it standing in the entrance hall, which was not where he would have chosen to read it, but his legs had not seemed to respond to the instruction to take him somewhere more private. The letter was from the club committee. It was 4 sentences. It noted that certain information had come to the committee's attention regarding his personal circumstances. It stated that his membership was under immediate review. It requested that he refrain from using club premises until the review was completed. He read it twice. Then he looked up. 2 members were crossing the hall at that moment. One of them saw his face and looked away quickly. The other one did not see him at all, which was worse. He put the letter in his pocket. He left the club. He stood on the street outside, and the afternoon moved past him. People, carriages, the ordinary city. And he stood very still in the middle of it, and tried to understand what was happening. He could not yet. He only half believed it. He went home. His butler met him in the hall with an expression that said everything, without saying anything. There was a newspaper on the hall table, open to the relevant page, placed there by someone who had wanted to prepare him, or had not wanted to be the one to deliver the news verbally. He looked at the paper. He read it. He stood there for quite a long time. The anger came slowly, the way it always did with him, not in a rush but in a tide, rising steadily, filling the space from the bottom up. He was not a man who reacted immediately. He was a man who got very cold first, and very precise, and very focused on the idea of who had done this to him, and what was to be done about it. He thought about the ball the previous evening. He thought about Eleanor on the terrace. He thought about the Duke of Hartwell moving through the ballroom in that self-contained way he had, not engaging with anyone particularly but somehow present in every part of the room. He picked up the newspaper. He read the article again. The documents. The marriage certificate. Eliza Marsh, 1809. The debts, named and enumerated. Catherine Hollis, not by name but quite clearly. £43,000, in print. The Cheapside Registry, in print. He put the newspaper down. He thought about Hartwell. He thought about the fact that Hartwell's solicitor was known in certain circles to be the most thorough man in London at locating things that people had put great effort into not being located. He thought about Eleanor, standing on the terrace. He thought, she told him. The cold certainty of this settled into him. He was still. He let it settle. He was a man who had spent a great deal of his life managing things, and managing things required you to be precise about causation, about where a chain of events had begun, about what the actual source of a problem was. The source was Eleanor. Or rather, he corrected himself, because he was precise. The source was the 12 or 15 minutes she had spent on the terrace, with a man who had the power to do something with what she said. He might have managed this if she had told her father. Her father was a man who could be managed, who had financial interests in the connection, who would not have wanted disruption. He had been managing the Earl of Sinclair for 4 months without difficulty. But she had told Hartwell. And Hartwell was not manageable, not by him, not by anyone. He stood in his hall for another 5 minutes. He felt the anger very precisely, felt where it was concentrated, felt the shape of it. Then he made a decision. He was going to go to Hartwell House. He was going to go there, and he was going to say what needed to be said, man to man, and he was going to understand exactly what position he was in, and what, if anything, could still be altered. He called for his coat. He did not wait for his carriage. He walked. He walked to Hartwell House, and arrived at the front door and knocked. The butler who received him was the kind of butler that significant houses produce, polished, expressionless, able to communicate extraordinary amounts of information through the mildest adjustments of his posture, without ever appearing to do anything at all. He communicated, by the set of his shoulders and the precise angle of the door he had opened, that while he was not going to tell Lord Fay that the Duke was not receiving him, this outcome was nonetheless highly probable. "Lord Cavendish Fay to see his grace," said Fay. The butler received this information with the expression of a man who has been told something he will carry to his grave without ever acknowledging he knew it. "If you will wait one moment, my lord," he said. He did not show Fay into a room. He left him in the entrance hall. He came back 2 minutes later. "His Grace will see you," he said, and led the way. This surprised Fay slightly. He had half expected to be turned away. That he was being received meant one of two things. Either Hartwell was open to discussion, or he was the kind of man who preferred to have difficult conversations face to face. Fay hoped for the first. He was going to get the second. The Duke was standing when Fay was shown in. Standing, not sitting, which was significant because when you received a man standing, you were not inviting a settled conversation. You were indicating that the conversation would be brief. He was in the center of the study, which meant that Fay could come no further than the middle of the room without feeling that he was pressing into someone else's space. "Fay," said the Duke. "Just that." "Hartwell," said Fay. He did not wait to be invited to speak. Waiting would have conceded the terms of the exchange. "I want to understand," said Fay, "exactly what you think you are doing." "I expect you understand it quite well," said the Duke. "You have published information, personal information, private financial." "The financial records are not private," said the Duke. "They are a matter of legal record. The marriage registration is a matter of public record. I did not publish private information. I published facts that were already, properly speaking, available. You went looking for them." "Yes," said the Duke. "I did." Fay looked at him. The Duke looked back. The stillness in his face was absolute, not cold. Cold would have been manageable, would have indicated feeling. This was something past coldness. The stillness of a man who has made a decision so fully that there is no energy left in him for anything but the clean execution of it. "Whatever Eleanor told you," said Fay, "she is a young woman who has misunderstood. She told me that you gripped her wrist," said the Duke, "and told her she would comply with your instructions regarding her financial affairs, or you would cause difficulty for her family." Silence. "That is what she told me," said the Duke. "That is what I acted on, along with the documents." "She exaggerated," said Fay. "She did not," said the Duke. His tone was so flat, so completely without heat, that the denial did not even raise his voice by a fraction. "She is not a person who exaggerates. She is a person who understates. Which means what she told me was, if anything, less than what actually happened." Fay looked at him. He had expected some version of righteous indignation that could be argued with, could be characterized as overreaction, could be made to seem like a man inserting himself dramatically into something that was not his affair. Anger was workable. This was not anger. "What do you want?" said Fay. It was not the question he had planned to ask. It came out because in the face of a man who appeared to want nothing, who had already done everything, there is a reflex to ask the question anyway, to look for the negotiating position, to find the thing that can be traded. "Nothing from you," said the Duke. "The matter is already in the hands of the appropriate people. I came to speak with you because you came here. If you have something to say it now. If not, I think we have finished." Fay stood there, in the long, well-furnished study of a man he could not touch, could not pressure, could not manage, could not threaten. Who had done all of this in one night, not for money, not for political advantage, not for anything that Fay could locate in the architecture of ambition that he understood. He had done it for a woman who had stood on a cold terrace and told him the truth. Fay did not understand this. He looked at the Duke and found that he genuinely did not understand it, and this was more disorienting than anything else, more disorienting than the newspaper, more than the club letter, more than the documents. He did not understand the transaction. "This will not benefit you," said Fay, because it was the only thing he could think of that might still mean something. "I don't require it to," said the Duke. Fay looked at him for another moment. Then he turned and left. He did not say anything else. There was nothing else to say. The Duke stood in the center of his study and listened to the footsteps and the door and the silence that followed. He stood there for a moment. Then he went to his desk and sat down. He had letters to write. The afternoon was well advanced. There were still things to be done, though the major part of it was now running on its own momentum. He pulled the first letter toward him. The pen moved across the paper. The study was quiet. Outside, London went about its business. Somewhere across the city, Eleanor was sitting with her father. Somewhere, the Bow Street office was reading a document. Somewhere, 2 newspaper editors were preparing their next editions. And in his hall, on a table no one was using, a cold cup of coffee sat next to a stack of this morning's papers, the one turned to the relevant page. The Duke had looked at it this morning, and then set it aside. He did not need to read it again. He had not written it in order to read it back to himself. He had written it because it was the truth. And the truth, once set free, moved entirely under its own power. He wrote another letter. The clock ticked on the mantelpiece. The day moved toward evening. And outside the windows of Hartwell House, London was already talking. 3 weeks passed. They passed, as weeks do after a great disruption, with the peculiar quality of things that seem both very fast and very slow at the same time. Certain things moved quickly. The formal dissolution of the engagement, managed by 2 solicitors over 3 businesslike letters, was complete within 5 days. The Bow Street investigation opened with the urgency of a matter involving criminal fraud, and by the end of the 2nd week, it was clear that Lord Cavendish Fay would be facing legal proceedings that would occupy him for the foreseeable future. Catherine Hollis, the woman from the country, had indeed spoken with the magistrate's office. Quietly, efficiently, with a composure that those who met her said was the composure of someone who had been waiting 4 years to be asked. Other things moved more slowly. Eleanor's mornings were different now. She woke without the tightening in her chest that had been her constant companion since the engagement began. She ate breakfast with her father, who was different now too, more careful, more present, more inclined to ask her opinion and then listen to it rather than nodding and steering the conversation in the direction he had already decided on. He was not perfect at this, neither was she, but they were trying, and trying, she had found, was the beginning of most things that eventually became easy. She walked. She read. She visited 2 women she had liked for years and had somewhat neglected during the fog of the past 4 months. She attended a concert and sat beside a woman named Louise Carey, who made her laugh twice during the interval, which felt like a gift. She wrote letters. She spent an afternoon in her father's library, pulling books off shelves she had not touched in years and rediscovering what she actually liked to read, rather than what she had been reading for the past 4 months, which was whatever Fay had indicated she ought to read, which turned out to have been, on reflection, fairly dull. She thought about the Duke. She thought about him frequently, in the way you think about something that has changed you, not constantly, not in a consuming way, but in the way that a new element in your understanding keeps surfacing as you go about ordinary things. At breakfast, when she read something interesting and thought, I would like to discuss that. In the garden, when the weather turned cold and the memory of a cold terrace moved through her. In the evening, when she was sitting with the day behind her and allowing herself to think about whatever she actually thought about. She had seen him twice in the 3 weeks. Once at a dinner at the Harrington house, where they had spoken briefly and with the comfortable directness that seemed to be the only way they spoke to each other. He had asked her how she was. She had told him actually, not performatively, which she was beginning to understand was a thing she could do with him. He had told her the legal proceedings were progressing. She had thanked him. They had moved on to other topics. She could not now remember what, only that the conversation had been easy, and that she had left the dinner feeling better than she arrived. The second time was at a concert she had attended with Louise Carey, where she had not expected to see him, and had seen him across the room during the interval. He had made his way over. They had stood together for 20 minutes. He had said something about the composer that she had disagreed with, and she had told him so directly, and he had considered her argument, and then said, quite seriously, that she was right, and he had been wrong. And the specific quality of being told, you are right, by a man who clearly does not say such things casually, had stayed with her for the rest of the concert, and rather a lot of the journey home. He had called once, formally, to discuss some remaining legal matter with her father's solicitor. She had not been included in that meeting, because it involved financial specifics that were, technically, her father's domain. She had found this mildly irritating, which surprised her. She was not certain what she wanted to say to him that she had not already said. She was simply aware, in a way that was becoming harder to be vague about, that she wanted to say it. She was in the morning room when his next letter arrived. It was not a personal letter, or rather it was not only a personal letter. It arrived from Arthur Wren, and it contained a formal summary of the current state of the legal proceedings, with Wren's professional assessment of likely outcomes, and a note at the bottom in the Duke's handwriting, brief and clean. I hope this finds you well and in good spirits. H. She read the letter twice. She read the note at the bottom 3 times. Then she picked up her pen. She wrote back to Arthur Wren, asking 2 precise questions about the proceedings that she had a right to know the answers to as the affected party. This was one of the things that was different now. One of the things she had decided in the quiet of her own room in the 2nd week. She was not going to be managed even benevolently, was not going to receive information filtered through intermediaries, was not going to let the fact that the system was arranged for men to conduct these things mean that she could not participate in them. At the bottom of her letter to Wren, she wrote a note. She wrote, I am well, and in better spirits than I have been in some time. I hope the same is true for you. E. She sealed it. She sent it. His reply came 2 days later, again via Wren, again with a note at the bottom. This time the note was slightly longer, 4 sentences. He asked about the book she had mentioned at the Harrington dinner. She had said something about rereading it. Had she finished it? He mentioned that the legal proceedings were moving faster than anticipated. He said the weather had improved, and he had been riding, which he did rarely, and found he had missed. She wrote back. 4 sentences also, then 5. He wrote back. 6 sentences, then 8. She understood, with absolute clarity by the end of the 2nd week of this exchange, what was happening. She understood it the way you understand something that has been approaching for some time, and has finally arrived at a distance close enough to name. She allowed herself to understand it. She did not perform uncertainty about it, did not tell herself it might be something else, did not reach for the polite fiction that this was a man conducting a cordial professional follow-up. He was calling on her in the only form available to him without being obvious, which was letters, and the letters were getting longer, and she was writing longer letters back, and the thing growing between them in the space of those letters was not mystery. She was frightened by this. Not in the way she had been frightened of Faye. That had been the fear of danger, the fear of a thing that intended to harm you. This was a different kind of fear. This was the fear of something you wanted so much that the wanting felt dangerous in itself. She had spent 4 months learning what it felt like to be chosen without being considered, to be wanted without being seen. She had come out the other side of that, into a careful, quiet freedom she was still learning to inhabit. And now there was this person who had walked through her life like a clear wind and changed everything, and was writing her letters about books and weather, and she had no idea, she truly had no idea, how to hold that. She went to find Louise Carey. Louise was a woman of 32, who had been widowed at 28, and had spent the 4 years since, making it extremely clear that she intended to live entirely as she chose. She was sharp-minded, kind, and incapable of pretending to be less than she was. She was exactly the kind of woman Eleanor had needed in her life for years, and had only recently found. They walked in the park. Eleanor told her everything, from the terrace onwards, which took most of the walk. Louise listened with the focused attention of a person who is genuinely interested, rather than politely so. When Eleanor finished, Louise was quiet for a moment. The notes at the bottom of the letters, she said. Did he write them in the same ink as the letters? Eleanor blinked. Yes, I think so. Then they were not afterthoughts, said Louise. He wrote the professional letter, and then he wrote the note, in the same sitting, together. Eleanor thought about this. He is a careful man, said Louise. Careful men do not add personal notes to professional correspondence, unless the personal notes are the point. Eleanor looked at the path ahead of them. A child was running across the grass in the middle distance, moving with the complete freedom of someone who has not yet learned to contain themselves. I am not ready, she said. Louise did not say you are. She did not say any of the things that people said when they disagreed with you, and were trying to not sound like they were disagreeing. She just walked beside Eleanor, and let the words hang. I am not ready, said Eleanor again, more quietly. But I am also not able to tell myself I am not interested. That would not be true. No, said Louise, it would not. How do you hold both things at once? With difficulty, said Louise. And then, eventually, with less difficulty. And then you realize that both things can be true, and that the presence of one does not require the absence of the other. Eleanor walked. She breathed. The park moved around her. He asked about a book, she said. Then tell him about the book, said Louise. Eleanor looked at her. Tell him what you thought about it, said Louise. Write back. Be yourself. See what happens when you are simply and completely yourself, with someone who has never once asked you to be anything else. Eleanor was quiet. That is the thing, is it not? Said Louise. She said it gently, not as a challenge. He has never asked you to be anything else. Eleanor thought about the terrace. The 4 words. The way he had listened. The way he had said, "You have my word," and then kept it, immediately and completely, in the most thorough possible way. She thought about the dinner, and the concert, and the letters. She thought about the moment she had disagreed with him about the composer, and he had considered her disagreement, and then conceded, seriously, that she was right. She thought, no, he has never asked me to be anything else. She wrote her letter that evening, the longest one yet. She told him what she had thought about the book, which was quite a lot, and some of it was a disagreement with his assessment of it, and she said so directly. She told him about the concert she had attended with Louise, what the music had done, the particular moment in the second movement that had seemed to stop time. She mentioned, at the end, that she had been walking in the park and found it better than she expected, and that she was finding, in general, that things were better than she expected. Then she paused. She looked at what she had written. She thought about Louise's words. Simply and completely yourself. She added one more sentence. She wrote, I find I am looking forward to the next occasion we might speak in person. I hope it comes soon. She sealed it quickly, before she could change it. She sent it. She spent 2 days being mildly frightened by this. This was, she decided, quite reasonable, given everything. She did not let the fear change anything. She went about her life. She had coffee with her father. She finished a second book. She wrote to a woman she had been corresponding with, about a charitable school for girls in the east of the city, a project she had put aside during the engagement and was taking back up. The reply came on the morning of the 3rd day. It was not via Arthur Wren. It was addressed directly to her, in handwriting she recognized from the notes at the bottom of the letters. It was 2 pages. She read it standing in the morning room, with the garden windows behind her and the September light coming in, and it was the most surprising 2 pages she had read in some time, not because they said anything extraordinary, but because of how plainly they said it. He wrote about the book. He conceded her point about it fully, with the specific detail that told her he had thought about her argument after receiving her letter, rather than conceding it reflexively. He wrote about a particular morning ride, a moment when the horse had startled at something, and in the second before he had it back under control, he had thought about nothing but the ground coming up, and how that had been clarifying in the way that only inconvenient moments are. He wrote about a letter he had received from his younger sister, who was in Edinburgh with her husband and seemed, from the tone of the letter, genuinely happy, which he found he cared about more than he had expected to. And at the end, in the same plain and direct way that seemed to be the only way he had of saying things, he wrote, I find myself looking forward to the same occasion you described. I will confess, without much embarrassment, that I find I have been thinking of reasons why such an occasion might present itself sooner rather than later. If you are attending the Pemberton dinner on Thursday, I will also be there. She put the letter down on the windowsill. She looked at the garden. The light was doing something beautiful in the leaves of the old oak at the far end. She was not frightened. She was, she realized, smiling. Thursday was 4 days away. She had already accepted the Pemberton invitation. She reached for her letters and checked. Yes, she had accepted it 2 weeks ago, before any of this, when it had simply been an invitation on a stack of invitations. She looked at the garden again, the oak, the light. She sat down at her writing desk. She did not write anything for a moment. She simply sat. Then she picked up her pen and wrote one short note to the Duke of Hartwell, just 3 sentences. I am attending the Pemberton dinner on Thursday. I am glad to hear it. I have another argument about the book, and I intend to present it properly. She sealed it. She smiled at it slightly, at herself, mostly, at the person she was becoming, or perhaps the person she had always been, and was only now allowing to simply exist. She sent it. She went back to her book. 4 days. The Pemberton dinner was not what Eleanor had expected. She had expected to feel nervous. She had spent several evenings preparing herself for the particular sensation of being in a room with a person you have begun to want, in a way you cannot yet manage. of managing the distance across a dinner table, and the noise of other conversations and the polite social machinery of an evening, all while knowing that across the table, someone was looking at you in the way he looked at things. She was not nervous. She was, instead, extremely herself. This was a thing she noticed almost at once, in the carriage on the way there, that the feeling she associated with the past 3 seasons of dinners and events, the feeling of gathering herself into the shape that would cause the least difficulty and the most approval, was simply not present. She sat in the carriage in her own clothes that she had chosen because she liked them, and she was going to a dinner, and she was looking forward to it. This was, she realized, fairly remarkable. She had not looked forward to an evening event in quite a long time. The Pemberton house was large and well lit, and held about 30 people for dinner, which was the size she preferred, large enough to move about freely, small enough to actually speak with someone. She arrived with her father, who was making an effort tonight to be the father she remembered from her childhood. Easy, warm, slightly too eager to make her laugh. She loved him for trying. She laughed at his jokes in the carriage, and the laughing was genuine, and this, too, was fairly remarkable. She saw the Duke almost immediately. He was across the drawing room, speaking with a man she recognized as a member of Parliament, and he was doing the thing he always did in rooms, simply being present without announcing himself. He had not seen her yet, or if he had, he gave no sign of it. She watched him for a moment from across the room, in the way you can watch someone when they do not know they are being watched, and found that what she saw was consistent with everything she had come to understand about him. A man who was entirely, unremarkably himself, who did not perform, who listened when people spoke, and responded when he had something to say, and was quiet when he did not. She moved through the room. She spoke to the host, who was warm and excellent company. She spoke to Louise's cousin, who was visiting from the country, and was funny, in a self-deprecating way she enjoyed. She spoke to an older woman named Mrs. Alderton, who had strong opinions about the current state of church music, and whose opinions Eleanor found she largely agreed with. She was in the middle of this conversation when she became aware, without turning around, that he was nearby. She did not know how she knew. She simply knew. In the way you know certain things about certain people when you have been paying attention. She turned. He was 3 feet away, waiting for a natural pause in her conversation, which was exactly the right thing to do. "Lady Eleanor," he said. "Your Grace," she said. And then, because it was what she actually thought, "You look well." "Thank you," he said. "So do you." He said it the way he said things, not as a social formality, not as a compliment deployed for effect, but as a statement of something he had noticed, that he saw no reason not to say. She introduced him to Mrs. Alderton, who was delighted. He spoke with Mrs. Alderton about church music for 4 minutes, with genuine interest, because he had, it turned out, a specific opinion about the use of the organ in smaller parish churches versus the larger cathedrals. Mrs. Alderton was won immediately. Eleanor stood beside him while this happened and felt a warm, private amusement. And when Mrs. Alderton was drawn away by her host, Eleanor said, "You genuinely care about church organs." "I find they are more interesting than most people give them credit for," he said. "I suspect you find quite a lot of things more interesting than most people give them credit for." He looked at her. "Usually yes," he said. They were standing slightly aside from the main cluster of people, which was not arranged, just how things had fallen. The light in the room was softer here, further from the main chandelier. Around them, the quiet hum of 30 people filling an evening. "You said you had another argument about the book," he said. "I do," she said. "The passage in the 2nd volume. I know you thought the author was being deliberately ambiguous about the character's motives, but I think the ambiguity was unintentional. I think he had not quite decided what the character was going to do when he wrote that section, and the ambiguity is a kind of artifact of the drafting process." He thought about this. She watched him think about it. He was not thinking slowly to seem careful. He was thinking carefully because he was careful. "What makes you believe it was unintentional?" he said. "The structure of the surrounding chapters," she said. "Before that passage, the character's behavior is entirely consistent. After that passage, it is entirely consistent again, in a slightly different direction. The ambiguity is only in that one section. If it were deliberate, you would expect it to echo somewhere else." He considered this for a moment. "You may be right," he said. "I am right," she said. She said it without aggression, just certainty. The old Eleanor would not have said it that way. She would have said, I think I may be. Or perhaps this is only my reading. Or some other careful softening. She said, I am right, and waited. Something moved in his face. Not surprise exactly. Something warmer. You are right, he said. You concede very easily, she said. Only when I am wrong, he said. Which is not as frequently as some people would like, and possibly more frequently than I would prefer. She laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine. The kind that surprised you by escaping before you could manage it. Several people near them glanced over. She did not care. Tell me something about your week, she said. Not about the legal proceedings. Something else. He looked slightly caught for a moment, as though the request was unexpected. Then he said, I visited my library, and found a letter I wrote when I was 17, and had quite forgotten about. It was a letter to a friend, detailing at some length my opinions on a political matter of the day. And were your opinions good? They were enthusiastic, he said. Whether they were good is less clear. Did you keep the letter? I did. I am not sure why. He paused. Perhaps because it is useful, occasionally, to be reminded that certainty and correctness are not the same thing. She looked at him. She thought about a 17-year-old version of him, writing long letters with great enthusiasm. She thought about the man standing in front of her who had kept that letter for 17 years. I think you are being modest, she said. I think you are being generous, he said. Perhaps we are both right. Perhaps. They were called in to dinner at that moment, and she found herself seated at the opposite end of the table from him, which was exactly the distance you would expect at a dinner of 30, and was therefore completely unremarkable, and somehow very frustrating. She spoke with the man on her left, and the woman on her right, and she was good company, genuinely good company, because she was interested in both of them, and the conversation was real. But she was also aware, at a level that ran beneath the conversation, of exactly where he was at the other end of the table. After dinner, when the evening moved into the larger rooms, she found him again. Not by seeking. She had not planned to seek him out so obviously. But they moved through the room in their separate orbits, and the orbits kept bringing them back into proximity, and at a certain point, she stopped pretending this was accidental, and simply went to where he was. He was looking at a painting on the wall near the far window, a landscape. Autumn fields, very plain, very honest about the fact that they were fields and not dramatic. She came to stand beside him. My wife would have liked this, he said. She had not known he was a widower. She knew it now, because he had just said it, and the way he said it, quietly, not for effect, not as a confession, told her that it was simply a fact he was in the habit of acknowledging. How long ago? She said. 7 years. A pause. We were married for 2 years. She was very good, he said, and I was very young. A beat. Not young in years. Young in the way that you are young, when you have not yet understood that good things require attention. Eleanor said nothing. She looked at the painting. I paid more attention to being useful than to being present, he said. She was kind enough not to tell me directly. I understood it afterward. I am sorry, said Eleanor. Thank you. He looked at the painting for another moment. I tell you this, not because I am burdened by it. It is simply part of what I am, and I would rather you knew it clearly than came to understand it in pieces. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the painting, and his face was the face of a man who is telling you the truth without wanting anything in return for it, who is simply making available to you the information he thinks you would want, in the same clear and unornamented way that he did everything. I appreciate that, she said, very much. He looked at her then. I know that there is a great deal that is uncertain, he said, and I do not wish to move faster than is comfortable. A slight pause. The pause of a man choosing his words carefully, which she had come to recognize as the sign that something important was being said. But I find that I am quite aware of you, Lady Eleanor. I find that I have been quite aware of you for several weeks. She looked at him. Her heart was doing something she was going to pretend, for the time being, was entirely calm. I am quite aware of you also, she said, and I appreciate the honesty. She paused. I would like it to continue. The honesty? He said. The honesty, she said. And this. She meant the conversation. She meant the painting, and the evenings, and the letters about church organs and books and horses. She meant the being seen. She meant all of it, and she suspected he knew that she meant all of it, and she did not feel the need to elaborate. "Yes," he said. Simply, "So would I." They stood for a moment more in front of the painting of the honest fields. Around them, the Pemberton drawing room was full of people being social, managing their appearances, saying the right things in the right order. Eleanor had been doing that for 23 years. She was not doing it now. She was simply standing in a room, next to a person she was quite aware of, in front of a painting she genuinely liked. It was, she thought, a rather good evening. October came with its particular change in the quality of the light. The mornings grew shorter. Eleanor found herself writing more than she had in years. Letters to Louise, letters to the woman running the school for girls in the east of the city, letters to the Duke, and increasingly, something that was not quite a journal, and not quite a personal record, but something in between. Pages she kept in the right-hand drawer of her desk, which held the things she wanted to remember. The legal proceedings involving Lord Fay moved through the autumn, with the methodical pace of institutions doing what they are built to do. There were hearings. There were documents submitted and examined. According to Arthur Wren's regular updates, Lord Fay's legal representatives attempted arguments on 3 separate occasions that did not hold, and were seen not to hold. Catherine Hollis's testimony was given in the 3rd week of October. Wren reported that it was received very seriously. Eleanor wrote a short letter to Catherine Hollis, a personal one, sent through Wren, expressing gratitude, and what she hoped was something more than merely formal solidarity. Catherine Hollis wrote back in 3 direct paragraphs. They were not friends, and might never be, but the exchange had the quality of 2 people acknowledging each other across a shared experience, and that meant something. Lord Fay left London in the last week of October. He left without announcement, without fanfare, with just the quiet evidence of a house staff paid off and a Mayfair address vacated. His name appeared once more in the papers, briefly, regarding the legal proceedings, and then largely ceased to appear in the social pages at all. He was discovered to have had several other debts that the initial investigation had not uncovered. His creditors were not sympathetic. He was last reported to be staying in a rented house in Norfolk, which was a destination that said, in the particular social geography of England, everything that needed to be said. Eleanor read the final Wren report on a Wednesday morning. She felt the same thing she had felt when she first read the newspaper 3 weeks after the ball. Not triumph, not satisfaction in any dramatic sense, but the quiet of a door closing cleanly, a thing done, a thing behind her. She thought about all the things that were ahead. She was going to the school on Thursday, to meet the woman who ran it, and see what help she could actually give, rather than what help could be given from a polite distance. She had spoken with her father about making a portion of her income available for this purpose, and he had listened and agreed, and the agreement was different from any agreement they had reached in the past 4 years. It felt, simply, like 2 people who respected each other working something out. She was rereading a history of the English common law, which was not the kind of book most people would read voluntarily, but which she had discovered was extraordinary if you read it with attention to the practical, to what the law meant in the daily life of actual people, and where it failed and why. She had written 4 pages of notes on it so far. She was writing longer letters to the Duke. He was writing longer letters back. They had seen each other 4 times in October. The Harcourt reception, the Alderton musical evening, an afternoon call he had paid at Sinclair House that had lasted 2 hours and covered, at various points, the common law history she was reading, the ethics of newspaper publication, the question of what responsibility people of their station actually had to those around them, and the complete works of a poet he was currently reading and thought she would find interesting. She had borrowed the volume of poetry at the end of the visit. She had read it in 2 evenings. She had written him 8 pages about it, which was more than she had written about anything in years. He had written 12 pages back. Not all at once, in 3 letters, the last of which arrived on a Saturday morning, and contained a passage about a particular poem that she read several times, because what he said about it was the kind of observation that comes from someone who has actually felt what they are describing, rather than merely understood it. She thought about that passage for 2 days. On the Monday of the 3rd week of October, she asked him a direct question. She had been building to it for some time. Not strategically, she was done with strategic. She had been building to it, simply because it was the next true thing, and she had begun to organize her life around true things. She wrote, "I have been thinking about what you said at the Pemberton dinner, about being aware. I want to tell you something in return, in the same spirit of honesty you have shown me throughout. I am not yet certain what I am, or what I want from any particular future. I am still in the process of finding out who I am when I am simply myself, without the shape someone else has tried to put me in. I think this is important work, and I do not want to rush it. At the same time, I am very aware of you. I have been aware of you since the terrace, and the awareness has not diminished. It has, if I am being entirely honest, increased considerably. I am not certain what to do with this. I thought you should know it, regardless." She sent it. She went to the school on Thursday. The woman who ran it was named Frances Bright, and she was 40, and efficient, and deeply, practically good. They spent 3 hours together. Eleanor left with a list of specific things she could help with, not vague, well-intentioned support, but specific, legal connections, access to certain professionals, one particular matter that required someone willing to write a persuasive letter to a person in a position of institutional power who needed to be politely but firmly informed that a thing was possible and should be done. She came home tired, in the good way, the way of having done something that mattered. There was a letter waiting. She read it before she changed out of her coat. She stood in the hall and read it. He had written, "I want to tell you that what you have written is one of the most honest things I have received in recent memory, and I do not take it lightly. I understand the work you describe. I think it is the right work to do. I would not want you to do anything less. I will tell you, in the same spirit, the awareness is not a problem to be solved. It is, as best I can describe it, simply a fact. A quiet and rather consistent fact about my experience of the past several weeks. I do not require it to be acted on immediately. I am not going anywhere. I find I am content to let things be what they are for as long as they need to be. But I wanted you to know that I see you, not a version of you, not the version that is useful or convenient or appropriately presented. You as you are, which is considerably more than most people manage and which I find, without exaggeration, quite remarkable." She stood in the hall for a moment. She read the last paragraph again. She went upstairs. She changed out of her coat. She sat at her window and looked at the evening light in the garden for a while. She was finding, she realized, something that she had not had in some time, something she had been reaching toward, without knowing quite what it was. She had thought it was freedom. She had thought it was independence. Those things were part of it, but they were not all of it. She had been looking, without knowing it, for a place where she could simply be what she was and have that be enough. She was beginning to find it. Not only in him. That would be too simple, too much like one thing solving everything, and she was too honest with herself for that. She was finding it in the school, in the letters, in the mornings with her father, in the conversations with Louise, in the pages in her right-hand drawer, in the books on the history of law, in the genuine and specific texture of her own days. But she was also finding it in the way a particular man wrote 12 pages about a poem and meant every word. She picked up her pen. She wrote, "I see you also," clearly, and with considerable respect, and, I will simply say this, with warmth that increases rather than diminishes when I am in your company. Let us see what we are. I find I am glad to have the time. She sealed it. She sent it. Outside the window, the October evening was moving toward dark, the sky doing the amber and gray thing it did in autumn, the garden going quiet, the way gardens go quiet when the year is turning, and there is nothing dramatic about it, just the ordinary and continuous beauty of things moving forward. Eleanor sat at her window a little longer. She thought she was happy, not perfectly, not in the uncomplicated way of someone who has not yet understood that happiness is made of small and careful things rather than single large events. But she was happy in the way of someone who has put down what was hurting her and picked up what was hers, and found, in the putting down and the picking up, that she was stronger than she thought. That was, she decided, quite a lot. She watched the garden go dark. She did not reach for anything else. She simply sat, and existed, and let the evening be what it was. November brought frost to the windows of London, and a particular kind of quiet to the mornings that Eleanor had always loved. She was a person who had never quite understood why others found winter gloomy. She found it clarifying. The stripped trees showed you what was really there. The cold made everything very simple. You went where you were warm, and warmth meant something, because it had been earned against the cold. She spent November doing the most productive series of weeks she had had in as long as she could remember. The school, Frances Bright's school in the east of the city, was where she spent most of her Tuesday mornings. She had written the letter to the institutional power that needed to be politely but firmly addressed, and the letter had worked. This surprised her less than it might have a year ago. She was beginning to understand that letters worked when they were precise and confident and entirely clear about what was being asked and why it was right. She had spent years writing careful, hedged letters that apologized in advance for taking up space. She did not write those anymore. She had also begun, in the second week of November, to write something that was not a letter, and not quite a book, but was something in the direction of both. She was not ready to call it anything yet. It was about the law, and about women, and about the gap between what the law said and what it actually produced in the daily lives of people who had no access to the mechanisms that were supposed to protect them. She had been collecting material for months without quite realizing she was doing it. The notes on the common law history, the conversations with Frances Bright, the things she had learned during her own engagement about how property and personhood and protection worked for women in practice versus how they were supposed to work in theory. In the evenings, she read and wrote letters and occasionally attended dinners, and the evenings felt like hers in a way that they had not felt in years. The letters with the Duke had taken on a different quality in November. Still long, still honest, but something had settled in them. The quality of two people who have said the necessary things and can now simply be themselves in the space between. He wrote about his sister's latest letter from Edinburgh. He wrote about an agricultural dispute on one of his estates that was taking up more of his attention than he had planned. He wrote about a parliamentary debate he had attended and found frustrating. He wrote about a book he had abandoned after 40 pages because life was short and the book was not worth his time, which she found very funny, because she had abandoned the same book after 35 pages and had felt vaguely guilty about it until he said this. She wrote about the school. She wrote about her writing project, in general terms, because she was not ready to be specific about it. She wrote about a conversation she had had with her father that had been the first fully honest conversation they had had about her mother, who had died when Eleanor was 12, and whom Eleanor had spent 10 years not speaking about directly, because her father found it painful. They had spoken about her directly, at last, and her father had cried slightly, which Eleanor had expected and had sat with, and they had been, after, closer than they had been since she was a child. She wrote, "I think loss takes up space we have designated for it, and then gradually, the space around it fills again. And it is not that the loss is smaller, but that there is more around it. I find this is true for things that are much smaller than losing a person. I think it is simply the way things are arranged." He wrote back, "I have thought about this for 2 days, and I believe you are right. There is a corollary, which is that the quality of what fills the space matters more than we usually give ourselves credit for choosing." She had read that several times. They saw each other at the Harrington dinner in the second week of November. 30 guests, a formal seating, and she was placed 3 seats down from him, close enough to speak during the meal if the conversation turned, which it did, twice. Both times the exchange was brief and of no remarkable content. Weather, a mutual acquaintance, a book, and yet each time she was aware of the specific pleasure of speaking with someone who was actually thinking about what you said. After dinner, when the party moved to the drawing room, Louise Carey appeared at her elbow almost immediately. "You are transparent," said Louise, with affection. "I am being perfectly natural," said Eleanor. "Yes," said Louise. "That is what I mean." Eleanor looked across the room. The Duke was in conversation with an older man near the fireplace. He was doing the listening thing he did, the real listening, and the older man was clearly benefiting from being actually heard. "He is very good," said Louise, who had followed her gaze. "He is," said Eleanor. "Are you going to do anything about that?" Eleanor considered this. She was very fond of Louise for asking direct questions. She was also, she had found, increasingly capable of answering them. "I am going to let it continue being what it is," she said. "It will arrive where it is going, without being forced." Louise looked at her. "That is very serene of you." "I have had a difficult year," said Eleanor, I am choosing serenity where possible." Louise laughed. Eleanor laughed. Across the room, the Duke glanced over at the sound of it, which was involuntary and slight, and Eleanor pretended not to notice. She noticed. Near the end of the evening, there was a moment by the window. One of those moments that is not arranged but that happens, because the flow of a party sometimes simply brings two people to the same place at the same time, and leaves them a moment of quiet. "I received your letter this week," he said, "about your project." She had told him, finally, in slightly more detail, what she was writing. She had been braced for him to say it was admirable, or worthy, or some other word that put a comfortable distance between himself and it. He had not said any of those words. He had asked 3 specific questions. One of them she could not answer, because it required research she had not yet done. The second had made her think for 2 days. The third had opened up an angle she had not considered. "It prompted me to consider one aspect I had not thought about," she said. "Which aspect?" "The question of what changes and what does not," she said. "The law changes slowly, obviously. But the reasons for it, what it reflects about how people actually think about these questions, that changes even more slowly. Or perhaps does not change at all, and the law only follows when the thinking has shifted." He was looking at her with the full attention that was simply his way of listening. "You are asking whether legal change is a cause or a symptom," he said. "Yes," she said, "exactly. I do not know the answer," he said. "I suspect both, at different moments." "I suspect you are right," she said, "which means the work has to happen on both levels at once." He nodded. A pause. "I think what you are doing is important," he said. He said it simply, not lavishly. Just, "This is what I think, and I am telling you." Something warm moved through her. She did not look away from him. "Thank you," she said. "I am beginning to believe it myself." The party wound down around them. The evening ended in the ordinary way of evenings. Coats collected, carriages called, farewells exchanged. She found herself in the hall at the same moment he was there, collecting his own coat. "I will call on Tuesday," he said. It was not a question, but it was not an assumption either. It had the quality of something being offered. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." He nodded. He put on his coat. He left. She stood in the hall for a moment. People moved around her. The footman brought her own wrap. She put it on. She went to find her father. Her father was in a good mood, which was increasingly his mood. He spoke on the carriage ride home about the dinner, about the people he had spoken to, about a political matter that was exercising him. She listened and responded, and they were simply, easily together, in a way they had not been for a long time. She looked out the window at the dark streets of London going past. She thought about Tuesday. She thought about the fact that she was looking forward to Tuesday, in the particular way you look forward to things that are good, and that you know are good, and that you do not need to perform uncertainty about. She let herself look forward to it. She had been performing uncertainty for years. She was done. Tuesday was 4 days away. She had 4 days of her own life to live first, and she was going to live all of them. The morning he came on Tuesday was bright, the particular bright of a November day, where the sun is low and the light is sharp-edged, and everything looks slightly more real than usual. Eleanor was ready for the call. She had been working since 8, first at her writing, then at letters, then at a short summary she was preparing for Francis Bright on a legal matter. And by the time the Duke arrived at 11, she had already done the kind of morning that left her feeling grounded and clear-eyed. She received him in the sitting room. He came in, and there was, as always, the slight adjustment of a room when he was in it. Not because he was dramatic, but because he was present, genuinely present, and genuine presence made a room feel real. He looked well. He looked, she thought, slightly more at ease than she had seen him in the first weeks of their acquaintance. Not that he had ever been stiff, but there was something different now, as if a layer of the professional composure he wore in public had been, in her company, allowed to set aside. She offered tea. He accepted. They sat. "How is the project?" he said. "It has grown," she said. "In what way?" "In the way that things grow when you keep working on them honestly," she said. "I started with the legal framework, and now I have found I cannot write about the legal framework without writing about why it exists, and I cannot write about why it exists without writing about the people it affects. And now I have something that is both more complicated and, I think, more true than what I started with. That sounds like writing, he said. It sounds like writing, she agreed. It also sounds like everything, actually. He smiled. Properly. This time. The full version, not the slight warming of the eyes. That was his usual near smile. She had seen the full version a handful of times now, and found that it did not fail to affect her. What will you do with it? He said. I think, she said carefully, that I might try to have it published. A pause. She had not said this to anyone before. She had barely said it to herself. Through what means? He said, not with skepticism, with interest, practical interest, the interest of a man who is immediately thinking about how a thing might be done, rather than whether it should be. I am not certain yet, she said. I know it will be difficult. I know there are people who will object, not to the content perhaps, but to the person producing it. Yes, he said, there will be. And? She looked at him. He had said it so simply. And? Not to be dismissive, not to minimize the difficulty, but with the genuine inquiry of a man who wanted to know what she was going to do about it. And I am going to do it anyway, she said. Good, he said. Simply, completely, without qualification. Good. She felt it settle into her like something warm. They talked about the project for a while. He asked questions. Several of them were good enough to make her think. At one point he said something she disagreed with, and she told him so directly, and he considered her argument, and said she was right, and she said he was unusually easy to correct, and he said only on the matters where I am wrong, and she laughed. The tea grew cold. They talked about other things, the school, his sister's letters, a piece of parliamentary news that was relevant to one of the matters she was writing about. The time moved in the way that time moves in good conversation, which is to say that it moved too quickly, and there was more to say than there was space for. At one point there was a silence. Not the kind that needed to be filled, just a pause in the conversation, the kind you get when you have been talking, and you are both comfortable enough to simply exist for a moment in the same space. She became aware, in this pause, of the quality of things, of the sitting room with the light coming in at an angle, of the cup of cold tea on the table beside her, of him across from her, sitting in the way he sat, easy and present, of herself, who was simply herself, not managing anything, not performing anything. She was, she thought, exactly where she wanted to be. The thought was very simple. No decoration, no qualification. Just, I am where I want to be. He was looking at her when she came back from this thought. He had the expression he wore when he was deciding whether to say something. I want to ask you something, he said. Yes, she said. Whether you would consider. He paused. I am asking in good faith, and with no expectation of any particular answer. And I want to be clear, that whatever your answer is, it does not change anything that is currently good between us. I understand, she said. I want to ask whether you would consider, in time, at whatever pace is right for you, whether you might consider allowing what we are to become something more formally defined. She looked at him. He was extremely himself in this moment, not performing the asking, not making it smooth or polished. Just, here is what I want to ask. Here is why I am being careful about how I ask it. She let the question sit for a moment. She had thought about this. She had thought about it quite a lot, in the mornings at her window, and in the evenings, when she let herself think about things she was not performing feelings about. She had thought about it with complete honesty, which meant she had also thought about all the fears attached to it, the year she had just come through, the slow and steady work of becoming herself again, the question of whether stepping into something new meant losing what she had found. She had reached a conclusion. I think, she said, that I would like that. He was still for a moment. I do not need certainty about the future, she continued. I am not looking for certainty. I am looking for someone who sees me honestly and wants me to be what I am. And I want to see them honestly in return. She paused. I think that is already what we are doing. I think I am simply willing to say so now. Yes, he said, that is what we are doing. A pause. I was not as good at it, once, he said. At seeing people, at being present. You are good at it now, she said. I am trying to be, he said. That is the same thing, she said, in the ways that matter. He looked at her. She looked back. The light in the room was still sharp and clear and honest, and she was very much in it, and it felt good to be in it. "There is no hurry," he said. "There is no hurry," she agreed. "But I am not afraid of what this is anymore. I would rather you knew that." "I am glad to know it," he said. She reached for her cold tea, just to give her hands something to do, and he did the same, and they both discovered simultaneously that they had let their tea go completely cold, and she laughed at this. And then he laughed too, genuinely, the real version, which she had only heard a few times and which was, she decided, very good. Outside the window, London was going about its business. A carriage went by, and a man on foot carrying something, and the ordinary continuous life of the city. Inside the sitting room, a fire burned in the grate, and the light came in, sharp and clear, and two people sat in it, and knew what they were to each other. The morning moved forward. They talked until 12:30. He left when the butler appeared, with a look that communicated that luncheon was approaching, because some things were managed by butlers, and this was appropriate. He said goodbye at the door. She said goodbye. She went back into the sitting room. She sat for a while in the chair where she had been, and looked at the place where he had sat, and the fire, and the window, and the ordinary room that had held something that was not ordinary. She picked up her pen. She pulled her writing toward her. She began where she had stopped that morning, in the middle of an argument about law and practice and the slow change of what people believed, and she wrote clearly and well, and the words came easily. She wrote for an hour without stopping. At the end, she put her pen down and read back what she had written, and found that it was good. Not perfect, she would revise, she always revised, but honest and clear and true. That was enough. December arrived, and with it, the particular softening of London that happened when the year began drawing toward its end, taking with it everything that had accumulated. Eleanor liked this feeling more than she had in previous years. This year, she had something to bring it toward. She had spent 3 months becoming herself again, and she knew what that self was now, knew its shape and its capacities, and what it needed, and what it loved. She knew what she was willing to do, and what she was not. She knew what she wanted to build, professionally, intellectually, practically. She knew what kind of mornings she needed, and what kind of evenings, and she knew the difference between the things she did because she wanted to, and the things she did because she had learned it was expected of her. She was not done learning any of this. She did not think you ever were. But she knew enough, now, to live it. The writing project was progressing. She had told one other person about it, Francis Bright, who had received the information with the satisfaction of someone who had suspected for months that this was where Eleanor was heading, and was pleased to be confirmed. Francis had read the first 40 pages, and had given precise and useful feedback of the kind that came from knowing the subject matter, rather than knowing writing, and Eleanor had revised with this feedback in her mind, and found the revision made the thing considerably stronger. The Duke had read the same 40 pages when she offered them, with the particular attention that was his default. He had asked 2 questions and made one observation that she had not expected, and had spent a day thinking about, before she understood why it was important. He did not tell her what he thought she should do with it. She did not need him to tell her. She thought that was part of why it was possible to show it to him. They were defining things slowly, honestly, with no performance of certainty or romance that they had not actually reached yet. They were 2 people who had learned, by different routes, to be careful about what they claimed and present in what they did. It was not dramatic. It was something better than dramatic. On the 3rd Thursday of December, he asked her to walk with him in the park. Not a formal call, not a dinner, not an occasion with other people, just, "Will you walk with me on Thursday afternoon?" She said yes. The park was cold and nearly empty, most of sensible London having decided that December was for indoors. She wore a coat that was warm, and he wore a dark coat, and they walked at the pace of people who are not in a hurry, because they have nowhere to be, and the conversation matters more than the destination. They talked about a great many things over the course of an hour. They talked about the school and about a parliamentary session that was relevant to one of Eleanor's arguments. They talked about his estate and a decision he was weighing. They talked about the new year and what they each wanted from it. She told him she wanted to finish the project and find out what happened when she tried to have it published. He told her he wanted to spend more time in one place rather than moving between obligations. Neither of them said anything about the other, which was not necessary, because it was present in everything. At the far end of the park, There was a bench near an old tree, and they sat on it for a moment, even though it was cold, because it was facing west, and the December sun was doing something exceptional in the sky. Not a sunset yet, just the promise of one. The light going amber and long across the gray grass. She was looking at it when he said, "I want to ask you something." "Yes," she said. She did not look away from the light. "I want to ask whether you would marry me." She sat with this. The light moved across the grass. The park was very quiet. "Not because it is the next logical thing," he said. "Not because it resolves any question or provides any convenience. Because you are the person I want to be present with. Because I would like to be present with you for a very long time." A pause. "You once told me that what you wanted was to live in your own life. I want that for you. I want to be part of a life that is yours, not in place of it." She looked at him. She was not frightened. She was not performing calm. She was simply there, on a cold bench, in December light, looking at a man she knew. She thought about the terrace in September, the 4 words that had opened everything. Who harmed you? The question that had changed the course of her year. She thought about everything that had come after, the anger, and the fear, and the documents, and the freedom, the school, and the writing, and the mornings, the letters about books and church organs, the cold tea, and the real laughter, and the slow, deliberate work of becoming. She thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Not effortless, not without complication, but chosen, fully, deliberately, honestly chosen, by someone who saw her, and by her in return.
"Yes,"
she said. He looked at her, just looked for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Yes," she said. "I would marry you." He reached across and took her hand. Gloved, warm, a steady and simple hold. Nothing theatrical about it, just the fact of it. She looked at their hands for a moment. She thought it was quite good, this. Quite good indeed. "There will be things to manage," she said. "There will," he said. "We will manage them." "I intend to finish the project," she said. "I intend to publish it." "I know," he said. "I am looking forward to reading the finished version." "You will probably disagree with parts of it." "Almost certainly," he said. "I will tell you so directly. And I will tell you where you are wrong," she said. "I would be disappointed by anything less," he said. The light was going now, the amber deepening. She looked at the sky, and then she looked at him, and she thought, this is a person I can live an honest life with. This is what that looks like, in practice. Not perfect, not simple, but real. "When?" he said. "When I have finished," she said. "When the project is done, and I have found out what it produces in the world. I want to do that first, on my own terms. And then I want to stand at the beginning of what comes next." "That is reasonable," he said. "It will probably be spring," she said. "Spring," he said. "Then spring." She squeezed his hand, he squeezed back. They sat in the December light, a little longer, until the cold became too much, and they rose, and walked back the way they had come. They walked back through the park, and back through the gate, and back into the city that was doing what it always did, moving, and living, and being entirely indifferent to 2 people who had just decided something. She was not indifferent to it. She would never be indifferent to it. She thought that was the whole point. The announcement appeared in the papers on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of December. The same papers, the same Thursday morning format, the same columns that had carried a different story about these 2 people 3 months ago. The engagement of Lady Eleanor Sinclair, daughter of Charles Sinclair, Earl of Sinclair, to Richard Ashworth, 8th Duke of Hartwell. Eleanor read it at breakfast and felt very little drama about it, and a great deal of quiet rightness. Her father read it across from her, and looked at her steadily, and said nothing, and then said, very quietly, "I am glad. I am very glad." She said, "So am I, Papa." She finished her tea. She went upstairs. She sat at her desk and opened her writing, and worked until noon, with the full concentration of a person who is completely in her own life, and knows exactly what she is doing, and wants to be nowhere else. The Morning Chronicle lay folded on the corner of the desk. The announcement was small, 3 lines, at the bottom of the society page. She had seen it at breakfast and had not needed to read it again. She knew what it said. Outside the window, December was doing what December did. London was going about its business. carriages and cold, and the light that was short and clear. And somewhere across the city, a man who had kept a 17-year-old letter was going about his own morning. And the afternoon would bring letters, and the new year would bring spring, and the spring would bring all the rest of it. She wrote another paragraph. It was a good one. She read it back, and knew it was good, and kept it. She wrote another. The morning was hers. The day was hers. The life was hers. She had done the work of making it so. And it was, exactly as she had always suspected it could be, very much worth it.